Recently, the term Switch Attach was mentioned as a possible sequel system in a YouTube poll, and while it could have been a made-up sequel name plucked from the sky, it drew attention as a possible name for the Switch successor system. I'm not going to even try to predict whether or not this is a genuine leak and an accurate name for the next system, but I do think the concept of a Switch Attach is really interesting and ties to a lot of my thoughts about how Nintendo can evolve their original Switch concept in a marketplace that is now getting ever more crowded with beefy handheld devices. So, in this video, I'm going to deep dive how the concept of attaching is actually a very good place for Nintendo to be, what this might look like in specific, and how this fits Nintendo's track record of innovation. We'll look at the cost implications and drawback to this approach, and try to forecast what kind of technology the next system may have. But first, let's take a step back and consider Nintendo's philosophy around gaming. In a 2017 interview, one of the company's top executives, Shinya Takahashi, was quoted by Wired discussing the new Switch system. He said, "If I were to put it into incredibly simplified terms, we don't necessarily view this as a gaming machine. We view this as a tool for play." Also in 2017, Yoshiaki Koizumi didn't ask me anything Reddit. Amidst a delightfully mad mix of questions, he came up with this deliciously thought-provoking response to the question, "What advice would you give to someone who wants to get involved in video game design?" He said, "I think one of the best things that you can do would be to expose yourself to other kinds of play, not just video games. It will give you a well-rounded sense of the ideas that go around the concept of play." Remember, this is the man who was the general producer of the Nintendo Switch, has been producing 3D Mario titles for a long time, and, under Shinya Takahashi, is one of Nintendo's most senior figures as a deputy manager of the whole of Nintendo's entertainment planning and development department. And his answer is so typically Nintendo. Nintendo's mantra at the moment is "my way to play," but their deeper and more long-standing mission statement has been to put smiles on the faces of everyone they touch. To a greater or lesser extent, all their systems and all their games have been about bringing joy and fun and delight. As much as, yes, they are a games manufacturer, they're also, at heart, a toy manufacturer. The Switch launch in January 2017 featured the slogan "Switch and Play," and if there's a successor slogan, "Attach and Play" seems to me kind of perfect. The question of what is your way to play is currently answered by the ability of the Switch to be played in different places, in different configurations, and with different play styles. This is massively important to their sales pitch, and I can't imagine a world where this flexibility is not just maintained, but developed in the next console. But they're also going to want those smiles, something fun, something charming, something that makes people go, "Only Nintendo." And because their MO is to take and adapt existing hardware, more than trying to go for stuff that's brand new and expensive, we're probably looking at functionality and tech that already exists. History tells us that in a straight-up gaming arms race, Nintendo will always eventually lose out. They couldn't compete in the tech space on consoles in the 2000s, and as the Steam Deck and its ilk became ever more successful, they could eventually lose their edge in handhelds unless they can distinguish themselves sufficiently. Yes, part of the way to keep that edge is through the strength of their games and their franchises, but as long as those games can be stolen, copied or emulated, this can only be a part of their strategy. So, are we really expecting the Switch, a concept that is now a decade old, to carry them into the 2030s without some kind of significant twist? It's true that all the hype has been around power bumps, but the 3DS was a power bump over the DS and used essentially the same form factor, but it did have something significant that was new, even if, in that case, it was an experiment that didn't fully catch on. I would expect the next system to follow the same approach, and the concept of attaching makes a lot of sense from that point of view. After all, attaching is already built into the core concept of the Switch, so let's have a look at a few times where it's already been trialled. Most obviously, you see attaching to the Joy-Con and the iconic Switch click. Because of the issues with drift and the need to offer free repairs, it's very difficult to determine exactly how profitable these have been, but the fact that Nintendo has continued to offer Joy-Con variants and that these are not cheap suggests that at the very least the potential is there for it to be a successful business model to continue to offer hardware add-ons. Regrettably, it seems that the drift issue has possibly helped Nintendo, as people simply replace Joy-Con, creating a steady stream of income for Nintendo, albeit at the cost of some negative publicity. Unlike the core system, there are few highly expensive parts in there, and you would anticipate that the margins would be higher on Joy-Con than the core system. Therefore, as they ramp up productions, the margins would only get better. However, there are other times that Nintendo has used the flexibility of the Joy-Con. Often forgotten is the Mario Kart steering wheel, which was one early example of this, and given the vast success of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, if even 1% of those players invested in the steering wheel, then it still sold more than the vast majority of Switch games, and probably with massively higher margins because it is ultimately only a bit of plastic. Then there's Ring Fit Adventure, where the Joy-Con could be connected to the eponymous ring, and the leg strap was used in both that game and Switch Sports. Labo also took the ideas quite far, including a long-awaited realization of a giant robot game, and of course with Labo VR. What's particularly significant about this is that Labo, Ring Fit Adventure, and Joy-Con proof of concept title 1-2 Switch were all developed by EBD4, and when the company talks of integrated hardware-software experiences, when they talk about what's your way to play, surely these titles represent the forefront of these endeavours. When prototyping a successor system to the Switch, they will be utilising the experience significantly of developers like these, and they have already shown repeatedly that they are interested in how attaching the Joy-Con to different kinds of devices can expand the way people can play. So, what could this look like? I think there are three main types of attachments we could be considering. Firstly, bodily attachments. Joy-Cons are handheld, the leg straps makes them carried on legs, but it's possible to imagine a VR-style headset being a head attachment, and we know that Nintendo has a prior interest in sleep tracking, which means there's also potential for a watch-like device that could track more in-depth information. Perhaps they could even bring back the Ultrahand. Yes, Ultrahand. I don't mean the amazing ability in Tears of the Kingdom, I don't even mean the 1960s extendable hand toy from Nintendo, after which Link's new ability was named. I mean a new 21st century Ultrahand as a control option for the new system. Basically, I'm talking about Nintendo using hand tracking technology. Look, innovations with controllers have been part of Nintendo's business for a long time. They pioneered in the gaming space D-pad, shoulder buttons, analog sticks, analog triggers, motion controls, and touchscreens. And now there is technology that allows the movement of your hands to be replicated in-game, and Nintendo have been feeding around the edges of this since at least 2017. There are many possibilities for what this could be. It could be that you have advanced IR cameras around your wrist, perhaps built into a wrist strap, or covering a large area of the Joy-Con's base so that you could track hand movements with far greater precision than anything we've seen before. And they could then use HD Rumble to provide highly calibrated haptic feedback. The level of precision that a wrist strap attachment could capture could be vastly ahead of traditional button inputs. Whatever technology would be precisely, the effect they'd be looking for is the ability to match in game space the precise or at least highly accurate movements of your hands. Motion control taken to the next level. Shigeru Miyamoto recently said, while discussing the Mario movie, "The idea of using my hands to create something really sits well with me. It sat well with Zelda's staff, as hands became a big theme of Tears of the Kingdom, a massive title that would absolutely have been developed with at least some passing consideration for the trajectory of the hardware development staff. Clearly it released before the new console, but that's not to say there's not some cross-pollination of ideas. I love Ultra-handed Tears of the Kingdom, and after 100 plus hours I'm incredibly comfortable rotating items to suit my needs. But wouldn't Ultra-hand be even more intuitive and fun, particularly for absolute novice players, if you could just rotate objects around by flicking your hand? Given how closely the development teams and the tech teams now work, I struggle to imagine that there weren't at least speculative conversations about how the Tears of the Kingdom Ultra-hand mechanic could be delivered in a manner that didn't rely on serial button pressing. It also has the advantage of leveraging an expensive but as yet underutilized piece of Nintendo technology, the IR cameras. At a time in their evolution as a company where they really needed to produce a console cheaply and make good margins to rescue themselves from the nadir of the Switch, they filled their Joy-Con with a new technology whose only real expression in terms of gaming at that time was 1-2 Switch. Since then they've made decent use of it in the titles such as Labo, Ring Fit, Mario Kart Live Home Circuit and Super Mario Party, but I don't think there are many people whose favourite thing about the Switch is the IR sensors. So why did Nintendo prioritise it so much when even at the time they must have known they were not going to get massive use out of it? What if it was a stepping stone technology? They've done this before. There is no earthly reason for the GameCube to have a handle except that it felt like a statement of intent for their home consoles to become more portable over time, a line of thought that would take a further 15 years to find its fullest expression in the Nintendo Switch. If the Tears of the Kingdom team were all about finding multiplicative gameplay, gameplay modes that would combine with each other to create ever more possibilities and options for exploration, the hardware developers have to be about multiplicative technologies, tech that takes what developers can do, takes what players can do, and multiply out those options substantially. Hand-controlled technology can certainly support the process of developing really good VR without having to hold on to another form of controller. It can certainly be one footstep in the journey to opening up games to gamers with disabilities. One-handed players could certainly benefit from the greater range of gestures available through hands, for example. We're not talking about some wild leap in tech, but rather taking the functionality that already exists in the current IR cameras and beefing it up to offer new possibilities. So, for a daft example, do you remember how in Breath of the Wild a lot was made about the inability to pet dogs? In response to this uproar about what we can only call Doggate, director Hidemaru Fujibayashi explained in his rather cruel, cold logic, "In this game it seems like you could do anything, but what it really is are all these interlocking systems where you actually have a pretty limited number of actions that can do a ton of different things. So, if it came down to something like petting a dog, we would actually have to put in a custom action just for petting a dog that couldn't really be used for anything else." And that makes perfect sense, absolute sense, not to spend developer time programming in something that only had one utility in one game. Except, let's face it, there's nothing more Nintendo than allowing you to pet a dog. Remember when Shigeru Miyamoto looked at Retro's early models for roughy-tufty Donkey Kong in Donkey Kong Country Returns and said he wanted DK to be able to blow the flowers? Tactile, experiential gameplay is exactly Nintendo's forte. But if Nintendo isn't currently the forum for it, does that mean that the dogs of Nintendo Land must remain decidedly unpetted? This is where a Nintendogs title with hand tracking would come into its own. What about the ability to use a range of hand gestures to shortcut through commands in games, or being able to use a throwing action to target Cappy in Mario Odyssey 2? Remember those line tracing games in Odyssey? Well, what if this time you had to use your hands to make a shadow puppet that looks like Mario using the Ultrahand and IR sensors? What if, as Donkey Kong, you can slap your hands around and feel the palm trees crack as the haptic feedback in the Ultrahand device rumbles away? What if, as Link, you could climb not by holding the up button while slurping a milkshake, but actually by reaching your hands out and finding the ledges that are best? And let's take it further. What if, using the same kind of spirit of creativity that informed Tears of the Kingdom, you could build something out of clay or cardboard or earwax for all Nintendo care, scan it in with the Joy-Con IR cameras and have it connected to the Ultrahand? Imagine EPD4, the mad geniuses behind 1-2-Switch, Labo and Ring Fit, creating a dungeon game where you need to build your own keys out of cardboard to scan and fit into locks to proceed. Suddenly, the gaming device in the living room isn't funneling people into a television screen, still less funneling them to attach screens to the front of their faces like a facehugger from Alien with an OLED screen on the front. No, Nintendo will say, look at the fun, communicative, collaborative, multi-generational experiences their bonkers but instantly understandable Ultrahand can promote. Cutting out cardboard, making things. Remember how 1-2-Switch was designed to be a game where people faced each other and not the screen? However bleak everyone 1-2-Switch's reception was, I don't think that dream is dead at Nintendo, and nor should it be. A fun gaming experience doesn't have to be an interplay between one individual and one screen. I realise a lot of these ideas sound dopey and gimmicky, and for some people downright horrific, but for one thing, I don't think Nintendo will ever get dopey and gimmicky out of their system, and for another, I do think that once the dust settles, many of these dopey and gimmicky ideas will actually become part of the gaming landscape. I can't imagine Splatoon 3 without motion controls, or Mario Maker without the touchscreen, but mainly it's just the sort of thing that seems like it would be fun and surprising, and frankly the functionality would be relatively cheap to implement by developing the IR cameras and possibly some HD Rumble enabled hand coverings while not really affecting the core functionality of the system. I'm sure any Ultrahand based system would work perfectly fine as a regular system, much like the Nintendo Switch, in just the same way that the 3D functionality of the 3DS was not essential to enjoy the games either, and indeed they ended up pushing out the 2DS and the new 2DS XL far more towards the end of that generation. So this is one kind of attachment, but another kind of attachment would be technological. Nintendo has a history with stereoscopic 3D, and it's had a long history with dual screen technology. The idea of being able to attach a second screen has done the rounds. A Talking Sock did a great breakdown of the topic here, but there's great potential in second screens being an attachment. Specifically, if they did want to branch into VR, A smaller attachable screen with stereoscopic 3D could be easily clipped into a headset for VR gaming. Nintendo is not a major player in the first-person market, but they have clearly sunk a vast amount of time and treasure into Metroid Prime 4, and also Mario Kart has a first-person mode. If they wanted a launch lineup to showcase first-person gaming, they could have it. Now there are queries about this. One screen would be expensive enough, but a second screen, especially one with stereoscopic 3D, might be a bit much. What if this were to be an add-on and not a core part of the system? What if their plan to recoup the considerable investment costs on Metroid Prime 4 from the franchise's ultra-dedicated but low-numbering fanbase is to package the title with this expensive extra screen? Some of Nintendo's top titles have included tech bundles, from Joy-Con with Super Mario Party to the Fitness Ring with Ring Fit Adventure, but this would certainly be on the more ambitious end. Also, I think a second detachable screen could have many more applications, especially if they could be located around the room. You could have karaoke lyrics in Sing Party, have the screen back-facing so both players can see opposite sides of the screen for competitions. At the very least, it would be Christmas morning for 3DS ports. As this patent shows, there is precedent for Nintendo to be thinking about detachable dual-screen gaming. In this case here, the attachable screen is double-sided with a touch-sensitive side. Now, all of this said, I feel that having extra screens sounds expensive and potentially overcomplicated if it's just a way to play a few games, but remembering Nintendo's message about broader ways to play, you have to wonder about another form of attachment the system can develop. We've had bodily attachments and technological attachments, but what about spatial attachments, attaching to things in the vicinity? We saw the Wii U gamepad being laid on the floor to play golf, but what if the Switch attached gamepad could be fixed to the wall to play darts? What if its rumble feature allowed players to pass an invisible ball back and forth? Or to be magnetically attached to the fridge to provide a window to your Animal Crossing island all the day round? Ultimately, I'm spending the least time on this possibility, as it feels like it falls into the same category as the Wii U pad and stereoscopic 3D. Diverting, but inessential. But the attach concept has the benefit that none of these things need to be essential. Like the 3DS, if you strip out the system, it would still be the same old Switch, just with extra juice, and 95% of the games would play with only the core features. If you want to see a full survey of weird and wacky possible gimmicks for the new system, please click on this video here. Otherwise, have a terrific day, and I'll see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.